So I did a 2 Megapops with every tower in BTD6, and it drove me insane. For context here, what is the 2 Megapops challenge? Well, it's where you take one tower and you try to get 2 million pops in chimps mode with just it. It doesn't sound that difficult when you think about it. There's literally only a gap of like 40 something odd thousand that you can even risk sparing. So some of these wound up being way tighter than you'd think. And also, some of them were pretty bad RNG heavy fest that drove me freaking crazy. For context though, I did do this in update 45, which may not sound that different from where we're at now with the game, but in update 46 there was a massive hit to Geraldo where once again they raised the price on all of his stuff in the store, which would make this challenge way harder for some of the towers than you'd think. What do we get most of the time in these runs? Well, for most part we're going to be getting the Alchemist, there's going to be a Middle Path Village, there's going to be an Overclock, Geraldo's going to star in a lot of these, and we're going to be diving pretty deep into this once we get some more towers. But for the first one, the Dart Monkey, we're going with the 025 cross path, and we're putting it on Resort to take advantage of the straight lines. And I think going for the attack speed with the Dart Monkey is still the better option, even though the Crossbow Master has some Pierce problems, because you can always replace the Pierce issues later on with stuff like the Permabrew or the Primary Village, which does help out a little bit, but it's still not really that great of a tower. So now that we have the Crossbow Master, there isn't really much for me to say on the mid-game or anything like that. We primarily are just saving up for the Permabrew. On Resort, this is really simple because there's so many straight lines that it's absolutely just using all of its Pierce and doing everything you want it to do. And I don't have any commentary on this, so we're just going to keep moving on. So the Crossbow Master kind of falls off in the 80s, which is why I'm going to go for a couple glue gunners. I'm actually going for the Glue Strike and the Relentless Glue, because the Glue Strike with the additional damage it grants you is really handy for the late game, especially when you have a fast attacking tower like the Crossbow Master. And I shouldn't have to explain the Relentless Glue. If you played this game, you know why you use the Relentless Glue. It is a fantastic tower with its stun, its slowdown, and it is so handy for the late game. So we're reaching the final stretch here, and you're going to see me do one thing that I tend to do a lot, and that is use all of the Geraldo items on 96, simply because I want the extra camo damage for 99, but ultimately the 98 is probably the worst round in the game for the Crossbow Master because of the Pierce problem and the RBE in this game being maxed out on this round, which is pretty crazy. Using Geraldo's Rejuve potions to keep basically a perma uptime on both the Overclock and the Glue Strike pretty much helped out pretty well. We were able to get through it. It got kind of close. I really didn't expect to win on that run specifically, but we make it to round 100 and we managed to finish this off with about 28,000 pops left to spare, so I might have been able to optimize this a little bit better, but hey, a win's a win. Now let's move on to the Boomerang Monkey. So for the Boomerang Monkey, we're going with the 052 Permacharge Crosspath, simply because the extra 1 damage actually does apply to the ability, which gives it a massive damage boost, and just having that extra 1 damage is way handy for the mid game, because just relying on the ability can be a nightmare, and without the ability, the tier 4 is just not very strong. Now, I have done more 2 Megapops with the Boomerang than I think I've done with any other tower, and you can do it with the Glaive Lord. It's very easy. The only path I haven't gotten the 2 Megapops with is actually the Moab Domination, but I think someone with a bit more patience and maybe a better knowledge of the game than I do would be able to do it, because I have a pretty intermediate level of knowledge of the game. I'm not at ISAB or Aliens Rocks level, but I played the game for a couple thousand hours at this point, and I have a pretty decent knowledge of it. So I know you want to put it on the straight lines, I know you want to do all kinds of stuff with the buffs and the attack speed, but I don't think 63 lets the Moab Domination win, because you can't even get the Moab Domination at 63, you have to go past 63, which can be a massive choke point for a lot of these runs if you don't have what you need before 63. So yeah, here we are on 63, and because I had to buy the stronger stimulant, you can see that it is a little bit dicey, but one quick usage of the ability helps wipe out most of the run, and we're back on track to get the permacharge before too long. Now, with the permacharge, I don't have much to really say in the mid game, because it's pretty simple. Most of what you're doing is just applying the buffs and waiting for it to just wipe the floor with anything that comes into contact with it, because it is a pretty strong tower. I really like it as a tower, and I think it does pretty well for what it is. So we're reaching the final stretch here, and as you can see, this run has been pretty smooth sailing. I choose to get a call to arms here because I think I would need it, but I didn't actually wind up needing it too much. Turns out just overclocking a permacharge is more than enough to handle 98, but it does come in handy a little bit with 100 because we don't have full uptime on the overclock. And with that, we managed to finish pretty easily, and we're moving on to the bomb shooter now. So looking over the paths for the bomb shooter, the only one I could feasibly see working was the 025 recursive cluster, simply because of the massive pierce. I wanted to try and do it with the bomb blitz, but through all of my hours of attempts, it never worked properly for whatever reason. I meant to say balloon crush, not bomb blitz. I think the tier 4 is just way too underpowered for the Moabs, so we had to go with the recursive cluster, which proved to be rough because I really miss the patch a few months back, or however long ago it was at this point, I don't remember, where the shrapnel gave them like normal damage and lets you just damage all types of balloons. Because the big problem with the bomb is that doing a 2 Megapops with it is really difficult because you can't use Striker, meaning that you don't get the boost to the black balloon popping, which is really awful. But overall, Geraldo still is the better hero choice for it because the Jerry's Fire is a massive DPS boost, which this tower desperately needs for the mid-game. So I chose just to get a sub for the early rounds, blacks and zebras, which you never notice are like super dense in the early rounds if you're not using an explosive strategy, which is kind of crazy, but hey, it is what it is. I gotta say, the price buff to drop it to 27,000 really helps out on challenges like this, because you can still manage to get it by 63 and have it with a few solid buffs and make it pretty easy. Now, much like the other towers, there's not too much to say through the mid-game, mostly because Resort is really good for using up its Pierce when all of the balloons are clustered around it like that. So I'm not really going to have too much to say here on that regard. Honestly, the primary section of this video was really simple. Way better than I actually thought it was going to wind up going. Alright, we're moving on to the final stretch, and as you can see, it's been pretty simple. I did get the call to arms as well as the overclock because we do need both attack speed buffs, so that way we can take out 100 because this thing still just does not have a lot of bad DPS. But beyond that, give it some slows, give it some buffs, and it's pretty solid. I don't really know if there's much I can say about it beyond that. It was able to complete the task, so that's all I really wanted. We do have to use both rejuve potions on 100 to make sure we can do it. And with that, we're moving on to the tack shooter. So for the tack shooter, we had two options. We had the Inferno Ring and the tack zone. But I think that the more fun option is going for the 520 Inferno Ring, because you can take Gwendolyn, and it's better than seeing Geraldo for like the fourth hero in a row, or first guy in a row. I try to diversify the heroes when I can, but ultimately it's not super possible because Geraldo is just the best for this stuff. But why did I pick Gwendolyn? Well, because a while back she got an update that let her buff the attack speed of all fire-based towers by 10%, and then by an additional 10% when she reaches level 20, 19, I can't remember which one it is. But it also helps out with the Inferno Ring's attack speed, and it's also just a really simple set and go tower. You just need to get the Mib fort in the 40s, and then once you get the Inferno Ring, you just sit back and let it play itself out. You might need to use some abilities if you have some tougher rounds, but overall, it's just really, really simple, and that's kind of what you want from runs like this. I don't like the super micro heavy, ability timing heavy, like those ones drive me crazy, which we will get to later, because that's what I had to deal with the Alchemist, and it was a nightmare. So if I hadn't done this exact 2 TC or 2 Megapops before, I wouldn't have expected it to be able to take 63 pretty easily like that. But honestly, give it some solid buffs. An Alchemist is usually what you need to get past the Moabs anyway. It can handle its own pretty well. This is not a bad tower on a map like this. Of course, obviously you're not going to be able to get the Inferno Ring before round 63, so it's not going to work like that, but it can still hold its own until you can get it. So I have no idea what happened here. I had about 4 deaths on this round specifically, which is weird because the last time I tried a 2 Megapops with the Inferno Ring, I never had that problem. So I had to pop off Gwen's level 10 to use it and get rid of that. And now we have the Inferno Ring and we can just sit back and watch it just meteor nuke everything for a while until stuff actually starts to push it. And then again with the final stretch, we want to get obviously a call to arms, because the attack speed buffs from it and overclock actually produce more meteors, which comes in handy when you're up against the bad on round 100. But overall, this was pretty smooth sailing, and we're on now to the Ice Monkey. And now we're on to the Ice Monkey, the longest one that we had to do for the primary section of this challenge, coming in with the file of about 46 minutes before I cut out all the losses and sped it up. So if you're wondering where the not inconsiderable length of this section of video is coming from, it's definitely the Ice Monkey. But for the Ice Monkey, I chose to go with the 025 Icicle Impale, simply because I feel like it would be easier. I know ISAB has done one with the Super Brittle, but I just don't want to try and deal with that mess. I feel like this is just going to be a way easier one. Admittedly, to an extent it was, but it was also pretty difficult given just how much the Ice Monkey kind of sucks in the mid game if you can't get the tier 5 up in time. Luckily, you'll see we managed to do that, but it's still like, this was just the first one that was just really dragging on and not super enjoyable to play through. Yeah, as you can see, unfortunately, we're going into 63 without the Icicle Impale, but we actually pulled off surprisingly well. Icicles is really good on 63 because you can freeze the entire massive clumps and just watch them break everything apart. From there, obviously, since we're not getting it immediately, we need to get the Alk buff so we have some extra damage to Moabs and whatnot, and we just kind of have to hold out until we can get the Ice Monkey, or the Icicle Impale. You can see why this was probably my least favorite so far, is because of how long it is taking to get the tier 5, which means that you're going to be spending more money trying to keep the tier 4 up, because the scaling starts to ramp up. Luckily, we managed to get it before the 70s, though, so it's not a major danger, but for some towers, it can make it significantly harder. So we're in the final stretch, and this is the first tower where we had to actually monitor pops pretty closely. You might have seen me clicking on the alchemist a couple times to check its pops. That is because we needed something to assist us with the popping of the bat on round 100, because this tower just does not have the DPS for it. But as you can see, this was, once you get the Icicle Impale, it's not that bad. Honestly, the biggest problem is just the slowdown on it makes it take so much longer. But beyond that, we need to get a Carpet of Spikes or a Moab Shredder, because that's probably the least damaging thing we can get. I do try to put it in a buff because we don't have the money for a Spike Storm, so I want to try and get as much damage as we can. And then we managed to do it and pull on to the Glue Gunner. So with the Glue Gunner, we're obviously going to have to go with the 520 Balloon Solver. I know that it's possible with the Super Glue, specifically the 205, I believe, but that way is much harder and much more reliant on Geraldo items, which is not exactly the most cost-effective strategy for a 2 Megapops. So the biggest problem with this version of the 2 Megapops is that we need to make sure we conserve as many pops as possible, so we have at least 9,500 we can use against the bad with a Moab Eliminator, because I think that's the only way you're getting enough DPS off before the bad pops, because the cooldown for Spike Storm is too long. The insides are fine, you can take care of the insides with the Balloon Solver. It's the bad layer itself that is a problem, because it just has too much HP for the Balloon Solver to take care of. I have to respect Ninja Kiwi for keeping this tower so cheap, because if you actually look at it, sure, it might fall off a little bit in the late game, but it is a very good, very strong early to mid game tower that really can help out any good strategy, especially with rounds like 63 and 76. So the fact that it's still pretty cheap and you can build a much bigger defense around it for those rounds makes it all the better. So you're going to see me do something kind of weird here, and that's buying a snowstorm and an absolute zero. That's because when it comes to stuff like this, you can't really amplify the damage of the balloon solver. You need to make sure the damage can apply for as long as possible. So you want stuff like slowdowns like the absolute zero or the balloon sabotage to really help drag out the DPS of this tower and force the balloons to deal with as much of the DOT as possible. If you ever try to use this tower, you definitely want to try and get something like that. And now for the final stretch of the primary section of this video. As you can see, we took only 2 buffs from Geraldo, and we have been keeping our money pretty well. I chose to get the Jerry's Fire simply because I wanted to try and keep some of the pop counts as low as possible, because I didn't know how much I was going to wind up needing and how close I would wind up cutting it. I was really hoping that I wouldn't make it all the way to the end and just realize I was a couple thousand short. That would have been really bad. But overall, we've done pretty well. As you can see, 98 is not too terrible. So I think that it's pretty safe to say that the primary section of this video was maybe the easiest, simply because of how overall balanced I guess it is, which makes a lot of sense. We're going to be moving on to the military, starting with the Sniper Monkey. Much like the American government, the time has come to focus only on the military for a while, and you might notice we've changed maps from resort and logs to the middle of the road, and that is because this was the only legitimate place I could find to make the Sniper 2 Megapops work. And for the 2 Megapops, we're going with the 025 cross path, which, if anyone who plays this game might know, recently got a massive buff to the shrapnel. Man, do I wish that would have been in 45 and not just 46, because this was a nightmare to try and get working. I tried originally with the 205 because I thought the single target DPS would help out a lot against the bad, and then I found myself constantly getting locked on round 98 because I just did not have the group popping power for it. So after looking up a few videos, I found that the 025 is the better crosspath for 2 Megapops, which is kind of unfortunate, but hey, it is what it is. I figured out that I should probably just stop going for the elite sniper and solely rely on just the regular buffs and whatnot. So here we are. Yet another tower I am happy is incredibly strong and also incredibly cheap, because we were able to get it pretty well before 63, as well as a few buffs as well. From here on, we kind of just sit and wait. I bounce with some Geraldo items every once in a while, but ultimately, this guy can do pretty well with some solid buffs. It's not until the late game, like the 90s and the 80s, where you really start to struggle, but ultimately, the shrapnel helps with the popping power, and the fact that it can be out-buffed as well is really handy. You might actually notice that a lot, because some of the balloons that come out second actually pop before the ones that come out first, which is weird to me, but I understand how it works in the game. It just kind of throws my brain off a little bit. Alright, here we are on the final stretch, and as you can see, we're doing pretty well. I did have to wind up bouncing between the call to arms and the overclock a lot, though, so that was really awkward to try and keep balanced for a while. But overall, I think this tower did pretty solid. I wish I would have been able to do it during the newest update where the shrapnel actually got the buff that it did. But with that said, we're moving on to the sub. And with the sub, we're back to logs. We're going to be doing the 205 sub commander, mostly because it's the easier one. I've personally done a preemptive strike 2 million pops, and I know ISAP has done an energizer 2 million pops, but I find that the sub commander is simply better. And the reason we're going to be going for the 205 instead of the 025 is simply because you can still apply the sharpening stone on the top cross path and not the middle cross path. So it's really better for buffs that way, and it's honestly just a really easy, simple breeze through. If you need the achievement for whatever reason still, I would recommend you just do this one. It's probably the simplest one here, because all the other ones, they require some micro and stuff. This one is really just set and forget. Alright, and then we get the sub commander plus a mib before 63, which is fantastic. This guy can actually hold 63 on his own, which is very surprising. Although admittedly the alch buff might be helping a little bit with that, I don't know. But if you even have this set up and can handle 63, then I'm perfectly happy with that, because some of the later towers don't have that luxury. And from here, we don't really have anything to worry too much about, because again, it's solid mid-game tower, so we're moving on very quickly. Alright, we're on the final stretch, and now we have to just buy a call to arms. The only thing we really need is some attack speed buffs. We're perfectly content with everything else we got going on right now. This one, like I said, there's nothing really to comment on. It was super easy, super chill run. Just get yourself some alch buff, some attack speed, and a couple glues, and you're 100% set to do this. We're going to be moving on to the Buccaneer next. So for the Buccaneer, I decided to go with the 250 Monkey Pirates, or Pirate Lord, and I decided to try and do something stupid, I guess. I mean, it wound up working in the long run, so it wasn't too bad. You can actually 2TC with the the Pirate Lord and a Homeland Defense, so I just figured I would try and get by with just that, an alch buff and Geraldo as my only support. No glue, no overclock, no anything, and see how well I could do with it, and it actually kind of worked. I'm more surprised than anything else, mostly because I'm not super skilled when it comes to like complicated 2TCs like that, but hey, a win is a win, so I will take it. And once again, we can get the Pirate Lord before 63, which winds up with helping a lot because it is surprisingly good against 63 with how many cerams are just super clumped up like that. So now we just kind of cruise on through because, you know, Pirate Lord is still pretty good even if they've tried to nerf it pretty heavily over the last few years. And as you can see, we've done pretty well with just this little rinky-dink setup. Obviously, you know, the Pirate Lord's ability can carry pretty hard with some heavier rounds, but overall, I'm just surprised that this actually wound up working. And we're going to be moving on to the Ace next. So for the Ace, we're going to be going with the 025 Flying Fortress. I grabbed Rosalia for the hero because her ability to discount the aircraft towers is actually incredibly handy for a challenge like this, because typically you wouldn't get the Flying Fortress and a bunch of buffs for it until like the very end of the game, which can make it pretty hard to get through some levels with just the Spectre. Admittedly, it's still pretty hard to get through some of the early game with a base Ace, because I try to save money by not buying anything on the Ace until we get Rosalia's levels for it, which is incredibly dumb and probably could be handled a little bit better, but I mean, it works out in the end, so I don't think it's too terrible, but it's not something I recommend trying to do consistently, I guess. You should probably upgrade the Ace more, because otherwise you're not going to be able to, you're going to have some difficulty with some of the earlier rounds, because the Ace is very RNG dependent. This is probably one of the easiest times I've ever seen a tier 4 have with 63, because look at how quick that was just gone. Unfortunately, we still don't have the Flying Fortress, but that's to be expected with how expensive it is. So ultimately, there's no real commentary for me to provide here. We just kind of gotta wait for it. As you can see, we're starting to lag behind a little bit in the 80s, which is why I picked Rosalia, because her discount will make me get the Flying Fortress way sooner than I would have been able to otherwise, which is honestly just kind of a godsend, because I don't think the Spectre can survive in the 80s without like super max buffing the hell out of it. The fact that I can afford both overclock and a call to arms will never not surprise the shit out of me with this, and it just easily handled that really well. We're moving on now. So for the Helipilot, we're going with the 520 cross path for the Apache Prime. I think you could do it with the Comanche Commander. I know you can do it with the Special Operations, but I feel like this one's just way easier. Again, we're grabbing Rosalia simply because of her discount, which is incredibly handy with this one because you can get a lot more going on with this one than with the Flying Fortress, simply because the price for the Flying Fortress is way higher than the price for the Prime. It's just the better hero overall. Man, it's a good thing that the Apache Prime and the Spectre are such strong towers, because 63 could have easily overwhelmed us there. As you can see, we're getting pretty close to actually getting the Apache Prime, which is pretty good. And then after that, all we really need to do is just buff it, support it, and keep it from, you know, dying, I guess. Alright, and here we are getting the Apache Prime, and like I said, all we need to do now is just super buff the hell out of it, give it some slowdown, give it some stun, and really just play through it. This is another one that's really simple, kind of like the Flying Fortress and the Sub Commander. Honestly, with the exception of the Sniper, the military ones, well, also the Dartling as well, but the military ones are all pretty easy to get through if you know what you're doing. So if you've played the game for any amount of time, these should not be a challenge to you. So here we are on the final stretch, like always, and as you can see, this is going incredibly well. An overclock really helps out with 98, 99 gets dealt with because of the MIB, and then 100 is nothing. We're moving on quickly now to the Mortar Monkey. So for the Mortar, we're going with the 025 Pop and Awe. I have done a 2 Megapops with the 052 Pop and Awe with the recent buff with the DOT and everything, but ultimately, I feel like the 250 is still the better cross path, at least when you're doing a 2 Megapops. Maybe it's better for more other strategies and whatnot. I'm going with Striker as well for the hero, because you can actually play Striker farther away from the track where he's not going to get nearly as many pops as he would with the Bomb Shooter. And then after this, we're unfortunately going to be back into the long stretch of Geraldo, because like I said at the beginning, which now feels like forever ago, Jerry's Fire just makes some of these towers 2 Megapops so much easier and so much more necessary to have him than with some of the other heroes. So once again, we see here the third tier 4 in a row that can pretty solidly handle 63. I don't know if that's because of Geraldo or the Alk buff, but honestly, any W against 63 is a great sign because, like I said before, some of these towers required some pretty heavy bullshit to get through 63. And now with the Pop and Awe, all we really need to do is time the ability properly to get through some of these levels, and then we just need to get some overclock, maybe get a homeland, and maybe some glue too. I don't think I get the glue though. I know I get the homeland and the overclock, but we'll see how far we need to go for any of that. And then we reach the final stretch here. So I will give anyone who wants to do this one a heads up. You will need to micro on 100 because it is pretty rough. You have to get really good with the microing and make sure the bat is always in the range of the blast. But it's doable, it's manageable, and it is pretty satisfying to actually do. And with that, we're moving on to the last military tower, the Dartling Gunner. So for the Dartling Gunner, we try to do a pretty crazy one. We're going with the 025 BEZ, Balloon Exclusion Zone. Quite frankly, this one is really rough to do. You need the MIB, you need the actual tower itself, you're going to need a couple buffs probably, and I don't know if I'd recommend this one over just doing the Ray of Doom. The only problem is the Ray of Doom also needs the MIB. Ultimately, there's no way to do a 2TC with the Dartling without using a MIB, which really sets you back pretty far on getting your tier 5, because that is like a $10,000 $11,000 tower right there. So it's going to put you back either way. Personally, I think using the Ray of Doom would probably be easier. I don't really know why I settled on this one, because the Ray of Doom, you just drop on a resort and you micro it a little bit for some of the later rounds and you can still get it pretty well. I think I went with this one because my brain said it was cheaper, even though it's probably not, but you'll see as the run goes on. Thankfully, once again, we have another tier 4 that with a MIB can handle 63 pretty well. I think from here on, though, it's going to get tighter and tighter, because towards the 70s and the 80s, we are going to need to micro the absolute shit out of this guy, and I do not like microing in this game. It is so annoying to have to do, but it's a challenge that we have to overcome to actually get the 2 Megapops with this guy. I might as well just knuckle down and actually get it done. So we were finally able to get the tier 5 after a lot of deaths and a lot of micro hell. We had to get the relentless glue, and from here on we're going to pretty well just be buffing it. You know, we need to get the overclock. Obviously the money's not going to be there for an alchemist, or at least a full alch buff, so we're going to just make do with what we have and see where we go from here. So we're on the final stretch here, and as you can see, this is just handily beating all of the rounds so far. We're having no issues at all. So with the attack speed buffs from Overclock and Call to Arms, we should have no problem with 100, and we're going to be moving on to the magic category next, starting with the Wizard Monkey. We're going for the 250 Phoenix Lord. Admittedly, yes, the bottom cross path is still better for the extra pierce, but I'm going with the top cross path because I was having trouble with the early game just being the straight regular wizard, so I think it's better overall because it doesn't waste as much pierce and doesn't waste as many shots too. But either way, both cross paths are pretty balanced for the Wizard Lord. Obviously, we're not going to be able to use Gwen because we need to get rid of the purples, which is going to be really difficult to do since none of the shots from the wizard can pop purple balloons. So overall, this tower probably wouldn't have handled 63 if it hadn't been for a well-timed usage of the ability, which you definitely need to time right because otherwise it's going to go off before the final Saran wave is out. From here, we mostly just kind of sit and wait for getting the tier 5 up. It's honestly not that bad. This is the king of the 2 TCs for a reason. He's a really solid one to have. And from here we now have the tier 5, and it's pretty much the same strategy you've seen so far. It's just buffs, buffs, slows, buffs. Now, full disclosure, I don't know if Call to Arms actually affects the Phoenix if you use it just on the wizard itself. If someone in the comments who's made it this far in the video, first of all, thank you for that. But if someone in the comments can leave a reply and letting me know if that actually does work, that would be very handy. I think it is affected by Call to Arms and Homeland because it affects everything on the field, but I don't know if Overclock and Outbuff can affect the Phoenix. And I didn't think about actually looking into that beforehand. I know it affects the main tower, obviously. If someone could let me know down in the comments, that'd be great. Yeah, this one wasn't really that hard to do. I mean, early game is rough with the purples and all that, but once you get a mib up, once you get the attack speed up, give yourself an alch, it's really solid and really easy. And now we're going to be moving swiftly on to another really easy tower, the Super Monkey. So for the Super Monkey, we're going to be going with the 320 Sun avatar because that has the best single target DPS of all of them. It's not ability reliant like, say, the Dark Champion or the Tech Terror, so I think it's going to just make this a lot easier. And honestly, it's the Super Monkey. This shouldn't surprise anybody. It is easily the best tower in the game. So yes, this is absolutely possible. And we are also doing it legit. We're not using the Geraldo hero cape to turn a Dart Monkey into it. We're going to get the actual Super Monkey itself and do it that way. and it shouldn't surprise anyone that pretty easily we got to the Sun avatar. And from here, same strat as always, buffs, slows, alk buff, and honestly, this is not even remotely close to a challenge. I literally have nothing to say now. Like I said, I don't really have anything to say here. It's the Super Monkey. It should not surprise anyone that this was really easy. I went and got a Glue Strike simply because it has a lot of low damage that benefits from it, and we're moving on quickly to the Ninja Monkey. And we're embracing the Ninja with the 502 cross path, simply because it's got good damage, it's got a lot of projectiles, which is really handy with buffs, and it can take the Sharpening Stone, which is also really good for buffs. Like I said, some of these are not super complicated. I don't really have anything to say on this. Usually when I did this one, I did it on Resort, but I kept getting Pierce capped, weirdly enough. So I think doing it on logs where I have a little bit more space would help out a lot better. So we'll have to see how it goes. It really shouldn't surprise anyone that a Balloon Jitsu was able to get us this far with just an Alchemist. There's a reason Ninja Alch is such a great combo. Now, unfortunately though, we did have to skip out on getting the MIB, so 63 can be a little bit tight with this if you get bad RNG with the Alch buffs. Thankfully though, with the high pierce and high projectile amount, it's not that bad of a problem, and we're able to start swiftly moving on to the major buffing stage. So once again, we got the glue strike because of the low damage of the ninja being pretty solid with that buff, and we're doing pretty well. We don't have anything to really say or struggle with. We just need some slowdowns for 98 and we're all set and good. And then with the attack speed and all of the different buffs and whatnot, 100 is no issue, and we can move swiftly on to the Alchemist. This is one of the 3 in this game I hated doing with every fiber of my being. So for starters, cross-pathing. We're going with the 042 because unfortunately the money is simply not there for getting the tier 5, and even if you did, I don't think you want to do it because you run the risk of losing pops. Secondly, the Alchemist is just not built for this kind of challenge. The best you're looking at is you have the middle path, which is solely based on an ability with a pretty decent length cooldown and is a nightmare to try and get done. Like, oh my god, this drove me so crazy. Some of these rounds took up to 5 or 6 attempts to try and get the timing right, damage right. The whole thing was just a nightmare to go through, and I hated it. Earlier when I was talking about how much I hated the ability-based ones, this is absolutely the first of the 3 that I hated. We'll get to the other 3 later, but for the love of God and anything holy in this universe, do not ever attempt to do a 2 Megapops with the Alchemist. It will drive you insane and it will make you question your sanity. It is that awful. Much like the glue gunner earlier, we do have to get an ice monkey now, because the ice monkey is going to be absolutely necessary for slowing and stopping balloons so we can actually get somewhere with the cooldown of the ability, because that is the biggest thing with this, is we need ability cooldown buffs really good. We're going to use Geraldo's potions like crazy. We need balloon sabos, we need relentless glue, we need glue in general, we need the 150 absolute zero to slow down Moabs and whatnot. We have to do as much as we can to slow down balloons without getting any sort of damaging towers, because God knows we're going to need as many pops as we can get saved, because it is really tight with this one. Yeah, 63 took a couple tries to actually get done. We had to really time the ability as much as we could, because we needed as many of each wave as we could knock out really quick. But as you can see, it was doable in the end, and we were finally able to move on and just hopefully try and get this over with. Because like I said, I hated doing this one, but there's 2 more coming up that I hated even more. Yeah, this one, as I've explained to you before, it's a nightmare to get through this one. I don't recommend it at all, but it's possible. It's just not fun to do. If you're a person who likes challenge runs and stuff like that, then I guess it would be fun to do. I'm personally not. I don't tend to do challenge runs. I tend to do more themed stuff when I play. You know, it is what it is. Everybody's different. And if you like this kind of stuff, then maybe you'll get a kick out of this one more than I did. But overall, we managed to do it, we managed to win, and we're moving on to the Druid. So for the Druid, we're going with the 250 Spirit of the Forest. Once again, I'm not sure how buffs affect the vines on this one, but I do know that you definitely still want to use Glue Storm for it, because that does help out a lot with some extra DPS. And honestly, there's not much to say here. I chose Resort because it loops around enough around the Druid to take advantage of the extra damage that the nearby Thorns get. It's nice to honestly just have a sit back and play one after the Alchemist, because the Alchemist was such a freaking nightmare, and honestly, so is the Mermonkey to an extent. I chose to go with the wrong one for that, but we'll get to that later. And honestly, there's not much I really have to say about this one. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that on a map like Resort, we can easily get the Spirit of the Forest before we get to round 63, and then it just solely handles it. From here, I'm sure you're aware of what it is, just straight buffing phase. Like I said, there's not much I have to say here. Said at the beginning of this section though, I'm not sure how buffs affect the vines. Like, I don't know if the vines get Alk buffed or Geraldo pickled buffed. I'm not sure on that. Again, if someone could clarify that in the comments, that would be lovely. So I guess we'll just have to see how this goes. So we had to be very careful with the pops because obviously it wasn't going to be able to pop enough. But with a Spike Storm, we can definitely handle the bad on round 100. And we managed to still break with the 2 Megapops. And we're moving on quickly to the Mermonkey. So for the Mermonkey, we're going with the 250 Poseidon. And this is what I meant when I said I think I picked the wrong one. Because you can actually get the Lord of the Abyss way earlier, and it would be a way better mid-game. You might struggle a little bit with some of the Moabs in the late game, but ultimately I think it would have just been better. But I feel like the Poseidon can handle the bad better than the Lord of the Abyss can. So I don't know, maybe it's up in the air as to which one of them would be the easier time. I do know that being stuck to an ability was really frustrating. It's also not as bad, because it is still a pretty okay tower without the ability. Plus, you know, Jerry's Fire makes things a lot better too. So we'll just see how this one goes, and somebody in the comments can debate which is better between the Lord of the Abyss and the Poseidon for this kind of challenge. So yet again, we're going to have another tier 4 facing down 63, but much to my surprise, I don't know if it's maybe the high pierce of the wave or the freezing capabilities, but it actually handles 63 pretty well, and I didn't even have to use the ability once, so I was genuinely surprised. Thankfully, we're able to get the tier 5 before we get too deep into the 80s, because God knows how much this would be a pain in the ass to deal with. Ability-based towers in the 80s suck, as proven by the Alchemist, and it is just way easier now because look at how much damage this thing is doing. It is shredding all the Moabs in its way, and we don't even have to use the ability yet. And to my surprise, we're actually able to get the overclock for this, which will make round 100 even easier than it already was going to be. And with that, we're done with the magic and moving on to the support, starting with the Spike Factory. So we're on to the second ability-based tower run that I hated so much, the Spike Factory. So full disclosure, I had originally tried to do this with the Carpet of Spikes, could not get it past round 79. So I tried to use Doubloon's strategy that he did in his video of this similar sort with the spiked mines and relying on overclock, homelands, call to arms, and I'm just going to tell you right now, it was awful. I hated it so much. I don't think there's anything in this game I hated more than this one. Yeah, I didn't like the Alchemist. I hated the Alchemist. But this one I genuinely, legitimately could not stand doing. And I'm going to tell you right now why. And that is simply because of the massive amount of RNG that could cause your runs to take forever. This run took me an hour and a half. I managed to cut out all the losses and all the deaths and get it to 40 minutes. And then I had to do the 4 times speed thing that I'm doing, and it got me to 10 minutes. This run was a freaking nightmare. I hated it so much. I don't recommend ever doing this one, the Alchemist, or the Village, but we'll get to the Village very shortly. But these three are the most horrific 2 Megapops in the entire game to try. This has got to be the only time I've ever had RNG bless me so thoroughly, because look at how easily that handled 63. Now from here, I do acknowledge I made a mistake. I was saving up for the homeland because I wanted to get the homeland first. I should have just simply gone for the second call to arms so I had another ability to rely on. That would have made the mid-game a lot easier, in theory at least. RNG plays differently like that, but honestly, like I said, I don't recommend doing this one. It is just a nightmare to do. I cannot explain to you how much relief I felt the minute I hit 99 and 100 and saw I wouldn't have to keep doing this. It was like just insanely... Oh my god, I was so happy. Yeah, it's possible. It's doable. I don't recommend doing it. But we're moving on now to the village, and that's going to be another treat. So let's address the elephant in the room. Obviously, yes, we have to go for the primary expertise because there's no other path on the tower that could cause damage. However, the primary expertise is locked behind roughly $35,000 worth of upgrades, give or take maybe a couple thousand, that you cannot immediately access. So we have to start with a sub and an alchemist and pray to RNGesus that we can get a pretty decent save on pops, because it is possible to do this. As I've done it, others have done it before, and it just recently got a massive buff to make it more possible. But it is incredibly difficult, incredibly tight, and if you screw up once, you could very well lose all of your progress and have to do it all over again. And God knows, no one wants to do that. Thankfully, we're able to get the tier 5 before we get to 63, and it can save us a pretty good chunk of pops in the mid-game. Unfortunately, though, we do still have to lose pops because this is update 45, not update 46, so the damage is not going to one-shot Moabs forever, and it does get through every once in a while, but not enough that it causes our run to lose. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think we only finished with maybe like a few thousand above 2 million, which is really, really tight. This is easily the closest 2TC in the entire... 2 Megapops in the entire game, and it's incredibly risky to try and do because you can easily screw it up and have to restart. Once again, final stretch. What do we got going on? Well, we don't really have much to do beyond just slowing down some balloons. I picked up a call to arms and an overclock, as I tend to do, so the attack speed buffs from them should definitely help out a lot, and we don't really have anything to worry about with round 100, so we're moving on next to the engineer. So the last two towers, this one's going to be a 520 Century Champion. Now, admittedly, logs might not have been the best map for this. I feel like we should have done this on Cubism. It might have been a little bit better. But the big strategy here is actually going to be buffing the hell out of him with attack speed buffs, because that actually does affect the Century drop rate. And that is what you want, because that's what most of the damage is going to be coming from, is going to be the Sentries. This guy himself is not going to be doing a whole lot, and there's not much I can say because this is a really, really easy one. You just got to make sure you have, you know, the right equipment, right levels, right tiers, and make sure you don't waste your money on a bunch of useless stuff, because ultimately all you need is just the overclock, the alch, and the village. There's nothing to this run that you haven't seen 1,000 times already in my other runs on this, and honestly, this one is another one I would recommend trying if you still need the achievement, because it's just super easy. So we barely managed to get it before 63, and as you're going to see, 63 is nothing to this guy. This dude is going to absolutely destroy it, and it's a really simple mid-game carry. Like I said, the only buffs you really need are attack speed buffs to really drop as many sentries as possible. Maybe some range buffs as well to try and get some more sentries down, like a bigger areas for the sentries to be dropped in. But honestly, this is such a simple one that it's not even worth talking about too much. So once again, another final stretch, another just wrap up, I guess. Ultimately, like I've said a dozen times at this point, there's nothing to really be said. You get the sentries to drop, you slow down some Moabs, you're doing fine. Now we're going to move on to the Beast Handler, and that is where we get some real fun. Alright, so let's start off cross-pathing. We're going with the 250 Gigantosaurus. Now, I wanted to do something fun since this is the last one, in a similar vein to what I did with the Monkey Buccaneer, what feels like 6 hours ago at this point. And that is that I wanted to get every single pop on a max power Gigantosaurus and no other tower taking pops. Now on the surface, that seems incredibly difficult because, you know, there's nowhere to really put Geraldo on this map where he's not going to reach the track, and the same thing with the overclock as well. But that's just because the tier 5 and even the T-Rex too are just so incredibly strong for this tower that it's no contest what the best tier is, or what the best path is in my opinion. So all I have to do is just get all of it max buffed and then it's fine. So we don't have the max buff T-Rex for 63, but that's perfectly fine because we also just have the T-Rex ability, and you know, the T-Rex is insane, as I said earlier. From here on, the best plan of action is to get the T-Rex to as much power as we can and start saving up for the Gigantosaurus, because, like I said, those are really, really good towers. And there we go. First of all, I want to thank everybody for watching this video if you stuck around this long. And second of all, as you can see, we do manage to get all of the pops on the Beast Handler with nobody else getting a single pop. That is crazy. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Hopefully it won't be some crazy challenge like this, and we can get back to some normal stuff.